Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. There's even a brand new Brigadier General tier where you can get a shout out on a Commander's Quarters episode that's dedicated to you. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So another day of spoiler season begins and another cup of coffee down. Who's got that coffee counter going? Yeah, Dave from Rhode Island, keep it going. Thank you. Anyways, during spoiler season, we've seen some really exciting cards, including the amazingly named Hostile. Yes, that's its name, and yes, you can beat your opponents with a house. And who doesn't want to do that? We've also seen another very unique card with Dire Strain Rampage, and in that episode I asked the question, is this yet another staple? So make sure you check that episode out to see my thoughts on it. But yesterday morning really started off in an interesting way with Old Stick Fingers. And yes, I have to keep saying this, but yes, that is its name, and that card is broken. So if you haven't seen that episode yet, make sure you check it out to see what exactly Old Stick Fingers does and why it's so broken. And I hate to repeat myself 2 days in a row, but when I woke up this morning, oh my goodness, is Lier, Disciple of the Drowned, absolutely busted. So what exactly is this commander and what does it want to do? Well, let's jump into it to find out. So, Lier, Disciple of the Drowned is a 3/4 human wizard that costs 3 blue, and this thing is a mythic for a reason because, well, get ready for it. Spells can't be countered. Excuse me, what? Okay, we'll get back to that, but let's keep going. Each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard has flashback. The flashback cost is equal to that card's mana cost. Okay, let's break this card down. Spells can't be countered. Now, obviously, that goes in both directions. And for a lot of blue mages out there, well, you might just be a bit nervous that you can't counter your opponent's spells. Now, there are technically some ways around that, and we'll get to those here in a bit. Regardless, that also means they can't counter your spells or stop you from doing what you want to do, and you can do some incredibly broken things. Because with this commander, your graveyard is essentially a replication of your hand after you've already cast spells. Once you cast an instant or sorcery, you immediately get access to it again, and its cost again is the exact same that you just paid for it. That is an incredible amount of value, and there are some really busted things that you can do with that, and remember, your opponents can't counter your spells while you're doing all of this. Now, obviously, if they try to destroy Lier, you can't counter their spell, but there are plenty of ways to, protect it with hexproof, etc., so yeah, your opponents are going to have a really hard time. So, blue mages out there, I recommend that you change your perspective. Countering spells? Nah, who needs that? Now all we need to do is have no spells countered, not even our own, so we have incredibly busted things going on. So what kind of busted things can you do with this commander? Well, let's jump into it to find out. But first up, let's talk about some ways to counter spells, but kind of not counter spells with things like Unsubstantiate, Narset's Reversal, and Discontinuity. Again, Lier shuts down counter spells, so you need ways to get around that if you want to, well, stop your opponents from doing something. Unsubstantiate says return target spell or creature to its owner's hand. So if your opponent casts something and you don't like it, well, you're not countering it, you're just giving it back to them so they can try to cast it again next turn. And then Narset's Reversal is similar. It says copy target instant or sorcery spell, then return it to its owner's hand. You may choose new targets for the copy. So this can bounce back any instant or sorcery spell, including your own, and it copies it. And yeah, there are plenty of spells in this deck that we really want to copy, and we'll talk about those and other copy spells here in a bit. And then there's Discontinuity, which goes about, quote-unquote, countering a spell in a different way. It's an instant that says, as long as it's your turn, this spell costs 2 blue less to cast, end the turn. So by doing that, you exile all spells and abilities on the stack, including this card. So if your opponent casts something you don't like, well, you didn't counter it, you just got rid of it. And everything else. And ended the turn. Yeah, there aren't many effects that do this, but I can see them seeing play with this kind of a commander. And speaking of cards that are probably going to be seeing play with this commander, the first one that actually came to my mind was High Tide. High Tide is an instant that says, until end of turn, whenever a player taps an island for mana, that player adds blue to their mana pool. So every single one of your islands taps for an extra blue. And again, when this or any instant or sorcery is in your graveyard, you can just flash it back. So you just flash this back for another blue. And yes, High Tides can stack. So now all islands are tapping for 3 mana, and maybe you copied this spell and you got another one for even more island fun. Regardless, you can have an absolutely absurd and explosive turn where you can easily finish out a game with this. And to make that turn even more absurd, let's throw in cards like Snap, Frantic Search, and Turnabout. Snap is going to bounce a creature back to its owner's hand and it lets you untap up to 2 lands. And then Frantic Search says draw 2, discard 2, untap up to 3 lands. But then Turnabout just allows you to untap all of your lands. And again, keep in mind, and I'm sorry that I keep saying this, your commander is giving these flashback too. So have fun with your oodles of mana. And of course, let's not forget about those lovely mana rocks that you probably have in play as well, so let's talk about Dramatic Reversal and Intellectual Offering. Dramatic Reversal is going to untap all non-land permanents you control for just 2 mana. And then Intellectual Offering says, choose an opponent, you and that player each draw 3 cards, choose an opponent, untap all non-land permanents you control, and all non-land permanents that player controls. So you can get even more mana and do even crazier things, and again, you can flash these back to do it again. But speaking of even crazier things, let's just cast a bunch of extra turn spells, because who doesn't love that? Extra turn spells that don't exile themselves like Time Warp and Time Stretch. Yeah, those are incredibly good with this commander. Time Warp is going to give you 1 extra turn, and Time Stretch gives you 2. But of course, you're getting even more extra turns than that because these go into your graveyard and you can flash them back. And again, we've got ways to copy them too, so your opponents are never going to get a turn again. Even a card like Exhaustion can be extremely effective in this deck. It may not be an extra turn spell, but it can shut an opponent down from their turn. It says creatures and lands target player controls don't untap during their next untap step. So if your opponent tapped out, well, you're basically blanking them on a turn. Or should I say 2 turns because, yeah, again, flash it back and do it again, and that player's just not playing. But when it comes to your extra turn spells, sometimes it's not the best idea to flash them back because you know what? We can just get them back to our hand. For example, Call to Mind's going to return target instant or sorcery card from our graveyard to our hand. So we get our extra turn spell back, then we cast it again, then we can flash back Call to Mind to get it back to our hand to cast it again, and you see where this is going. And again, while we're doing this, we can just, use Twin Cast to copy it too. So we can cast and flash back other cards to make the most out of cards that we don't want to flash back just quite yet. So of course you can take all the turns and lose all your friends. Just kidding. Some playgroups are completely fine with you taking a lot of turns, and that's completely fine. And of course, outside of instants and sorceries, we even have some enchantments that can make this even more fun for you. Swarm Intelligence says, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may copy that spell, you may choose new targets for the copy. So all those broken things that you're doing, do even more of them. And then Jace's Sanctum and Arcane Melee can make your spells even cheaper to cast. Jace's Sanctum says, instant sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, scry 1. And Arcane Melee, yes, does help out everyone by reducing the cost of everyone's instants and sorceries, but still. With all the broken things that you're doing and they can't counter, good luck to them. And of course, you can keep the fun times rolling with cards like Read the Runes and even Increasing Confusion. Read the Runes says draw X cards. For each card drawn this way, discard a card unless you sacrifice a permanent. Discarding a card really isn't all that bad of a thing in this deck because, again, your graveyard is essentially an extension of your hand and you can just flash that card back. So yeah, at instant speed, dump a ton of mana into this and get access to an absurd amount of cards. Speaking of which, Increasing Infusion says, target player puts the top X cards of their library into their graveyard, but if it was cast from a graveyard, that player puts twice that many cards into their graveyard instead. So basically, mill yourself for an absurd amount and get access to an absurd amount of cards. And speaking of getting access to cards, of course there are some tutors that you can really use and abuse in this deck, like Merchant Scroll and Solve the Equation. Merchant Scroll is going to get you a blue instant, and Solve the Equation get you any instant or sorcery card. And yeah, you can flash these back to get them again, so have fun getting your extra turn spells, or untap spells, or High Tide, or whatever you want to get. Best of luck to your opponents because it's not going to be good for them. Now, as busted as this card is as a commander, it's going to be really interesting to see how many commanders actually want this in their 99. Again, shutting down your own counterspells is probably a no-go for a lot of commanders. Regardless, if you've got a Vega deck and you're okay with shutting down your own counterspells, as long as you're shutting down your opponent's too, you might be considering this card. Because Vega says whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, draw a card. Giving all your spells flashback is an incredibly powerful thing, especially in a Vega deck where you can just draw even more cards because of that. Or how about Nimbus at Perrin, which says whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell, you draw a card, and whenever you draw a card, it deals 1 damage to any target. So yeah, in this deck, you're going to be casting a ton of spells and pinging a lot of things. And you're probably going to be wheeling and doing a lot of broken things as well, and you can combo with this commander too, so yeah, not allowing things to be countered can be really good. But speaking of wheeling, yeah, Xyrus the Writhing Storm might consider this too. It says whenever an opponent draws a card except the first one they draw on each of their draw steps, create a 1/1 green snake creature token. Basically, wheel, make a ton of snakes. And of course, with Lier in play, your wheels can't be countered, so there's no stopping you, and you can just wheel again because they're in your graveyard, and now they've got flashback. Regardless, now this episode is coming to a close, and it's time for me to give you my final thoughts on Lier, Disciple of the Drowned. Again, blue mages out there, change your perspective. Countering spells, who needs that? No countering is good. When your spells can't be countered, you can do some incredibly busted things. Especially with a commander that allows you to recast all your busted spells from your graveyard. So make a ton of mana in a turn, take 50 extra turns, do whatever you want because your opponents can't stop you with Lier. Yeah, in summary, this commander is busted. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.